Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this really interesting panel discussion that I'm looking forward to. As mentioned, my name is Saranya Gopinath. I actually spent my college years in Pune. I've spent most of it, in fact, roaming around FC Road, Senapati Bapat Road. So this has been really exciting for me to come back to the inaugural Pune Public Policy Festival. So first off, thank you everyone, and thank you to this amazing audience. I know this is the third panel in a row, but I assure you these panelists are going to make it worth it. I want to take a quick minute to talk about what we're looking to achieve in this panel. As policy makers, policy enthusiasts, we've all been witness to conversations around the concerns of violations of data and emerging technologies like AI. We all know the concerns. Legislations are being formed, and frameworks continue to be attempted to be formed to rank in all of these concerns. However, I feel we've gone so far down this road that now we only speak in hyperbole. We either talk about completely restraining these aspects, which make it excessively restrictive, or excessively permissible. Now, let's be very clear. The intent of this conversation is not to undermine the dangers of violation of data rights, privacy rights, or emerging technologies like AI. Cambridge Analytica stretched our imagination as to the definition of harm. It reframed it in a way that we had never thought of before. Deepfakes are some of the worst formats of implementing AI technology. However, the objective of this conversation is to go back to the basics. Understand why we are in this conversation and this negotiation to begin with. What are we looking to achieve? And what we are hoping to achieve at the end of this negotiation. Because that's what it's supposed to be, a negotiation. And with that, I would love to pass it on to the panelists, and we'll start off with an easy one. What, to your mind, are the trade-offs that you, in your personal life, either see yourself making or are comfortable making with regards to your data rights and privacy? For example, for me, it's almost like a guilty one, but I like that Google makes my travel plans so easy. I had suggestions of Pune before I landed, before I asked anybody. And it even told me when I should leave for the airport. Now, that's not something I explicitly signed on for, but a part of me is very grateful for it. So if you could just take a turn with a one-line introduction of yourself, as well as talk about how personally you see the trade-off working for you. Anshul?
Hello everyone. First of all, many thanks for having me here, and congratulations to organizers and all the participants for the wonderful event. I work with the government. I am an IAS officer of 16 batch Madhya Pradesh cadre. Before that, I was in police. Suhail is my batchmate, and before that, I was in corporate, and I am an engineer and MBA, like half of the Indians of our age. So, what trade-offs we make? So, as since last 2 days, we have been discussing about trade-offs, and yes, the trade-offs was there. So, to me, my mind, it will come that, say, for example, you are surfing history in IMDb, or some movie you watch or something you purchase. So, one thing is very good, as rightly mentioned, that it does half of your work. But at the same time, it brackets you, it kind of stereotypes you based on your consumption pattern, based on your behavioral pattern. And gradually, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, or it's a vicious or virtuous cycle, I don't know what you want to call. So in that sense, consumers are bracketed, and one can say that somebody who is writing an algorithm somewhere, he or she decides, literally he or she may decide, what you will consume in future. Because you get your mind and your even the behavior get trained in that way. So it's a very typical trade-off. So you are happy that Facebook or Instagram suggests you that these many friends of yours are there and you can connect with them. But at sometimes there are privacy concerns as well. So and that's why all these apps and all these tools have very interesting features. The WhatsApp has feature that you can be seen your last online or read recepts. So depending on you're in your official group or your family group, you on and off the settings. So the trade-offs are huge. And as when we are growing up and we'll, have this typical thing in the primary school that science is a boon or a, ban or nuclear weapons. So it's like that. But the only thing is that this technology tools or the IT tools and the whole host of intermediaries, where will social media, OTT, gaming, digital advertising, the sheer expanse is huge. It's covering all aspects of our life, and then many times we don't even know, and we are making choices. So it's in a way, yeah, it's in a way overwhelming for the individuals.
My name is Venkatesh Hariharan. I am the Public Policy Director for a non-profit called FOSS United, which works to grow the open source community. I used to run something called the Data Governance Network, which is where I met with Sahil, who wrote a paper on algorithmic explainability way before AI, etc. was really big. But coming to the question that you asked, it reminds me of what happened about 5 years ago. One of my friends had his 40th birthday, and there were some 50 people who were invited. He had a photographer. He took photographs with all of the 50 people who came. Photos were plastered on Facebook. Now, 5 years later, it's his 45th birthday. People are telling him, don't take photographs, or if you take photographs, don't put it on social media. And he himself, did nothing on social media. So slowly, I think people are getting more and more aware of issues around privacy. When it comes to trade-offs, I think today what has happened is the game is being set so that, the conveniences that we have been offered are so seductive that we just keep making those choices automatically. We are just quietly nudged into taking those choices. I think I would like to see a world where, there is a greater degree of privacy preservation. There is greater kind of, enforcement of privacy laws, punitive measures for, violations of privacy. And I think in the next few years, we will see things getting worse before they get better. Because with AI, there's nothing called sensitive personal data. All data is, sensitive. Because if you take 3 different data sets, you can start identifying and pinpointing individuals within that data set. And there are so many examples, the work of Lantana Sweeney in Harvard, et cetera, et cetera. So I think today the trade-offs are like, you do not really have much choice. You can say, for example, that if I'm using the Mac, I will not use Safari because that's also another Mac product. You can say that, if I am using Google, I will not use Fitbit because that's another Google product. So you can silo your data to some extent, but it's, like pushing the ocean back.
Yeah, so my name is Mandar. I founded a public policy advocacy firm focused on fintech and financial services. Basically, we are exclusively solving regulatory policy problems for fintech firms. That is to say, the young startups that are focused on financial services and incumbents over the past 4 years or so. Okay, so to respond to Saranya's Q, three bullets essentially: Netflix, Spotify, Bumble. Okay, that's how these 3 sort of form a canonical troika, so to speak, of how my personal life I trade off. And I'll give you a little bit of context as to how these things play out in both positive and negative way. Netflix, I prefer a certain genre, and every time sort of I visit Netflix, it throws up finance, it throws up, World War II documentaries, and, it throws up, Mindhunter kind of, a drama series, right? So I love that, because I wouldn't want to go on, Netflix and see some, rom-coms and the like. That's not my genre. Likewise with Spotify, it throws up investment podcasts that I do almost regularly, religiously every day. Spotify throws up Punjabi pop, which I love. Marathi, I have a interest in sort of looking at what Marathi music is about, so on and so forth. So these are the positive trade-offs that I do. I couldn't care. I mean, there might be some clause in the user agreement that I've never looked at that will, of course, cover what they are doing in terms of like following my, tracking my uses. But I even if they weren't, I couldn't care less. That's a positive use. Now come to Bumble or Zomato for that matter. Look at what they do. You log into Bumble, it asks you for location data. Now, I'm a Delhiite. Bumble markets itself as a product for a mature dating audience. Ergo, proximity is not really a problem for it, or should not be a problem for it, compared to, say, its immediate opponent, Tinder, which is directed to a more younger audience, which kind of is okay with proximity. So I'm in Bangalore, I'm looking at a quick date, and I log on to Bumble, that's perfectly fine, and you can take my location data. You can therefore add value to my experience in Bangalore for that weekend. That's not the case with Bumble, at least it doesn't market it. So it's not necessary for it to have location data, but it does. And because I'm used to Bumble, I trade that off, right? Okay, so these three, and in Zomato also, although Zomato, there is a stronger case for it, because you want to throw out, like I was looking at what restaurants Pune has to offer, and the like, so I through some local favorites. So that's fine. So this is how essentially we trade off. I'll stop there because there's a lot of ground to cover, and I'll yield.
Hi, I'm Shivangi Nadkarni. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Arca. We've been working in the privacy implementation space for about a decade now, helping organizations essentially implement privacy. I think in terms of trade-off, every time I download an app, every time I go online and visit a website, I'm doing a trade-off, right? It's like, I'm not even talking social media, I'm not even talking the Netflixes of the world. So every time I download a banking app, every time I use one of the fintech apps, right? A news app, a health app, it's all a trade-off, right? I'm just going to quote some statistics. Be at Arca, I've been doing a study for the last 7 years of Indian apps, and not social media, but regular apps that we use. And we're releasing the report this coming week, but I'll read out some stats. 76% of Indian Android apps take access to precise location, considering what you were just talking. And remember, Android allows you to take permission to what is called coarse location, approximate location, versus precise location. About 70% have access to camera, 58% to microphone. Okay, and iOS is no different. About 51% of iOS apps continue accessing your location when even when the app is not in use. Okay, if coming to websites, an average Indian website has about 18 third parties lurking in it, right? So every single time I go online, I'm making a trade-off. So then it's up to you with what you want to give up on.
Yep, no, completely. And I think that's really where the conversation currently is. If you look at the recent Data Protection Act that came up, the Personal Data Protection Act, there are references or at least calls to action for data minimization. There are calls of ensuring that you have purpose limitation. But to my mind, there are no clear guidances, and this is across GDPR and local laws, of what the purpose can or cannot cover. Now, there is nothing stopping me from saying that I want to collect your data on on Bumble to potentially solve for world peace. And I want to hold on to this data because I feel it is going to be useful for world peace. There is nothing currently which provides a guideline, one which way or the other, of what I need to do for that. And this brings us to the second question. There are lots of trade-offs that we are comfortable navigating individually, and we do navigate on a daily basis. But would I want the same thing for us as a society? Maybe, maybe not. For example, I may feel that I have the wherewithal and I have the diligence to evaluate whether I want to share certain of my health data. But am I comfortable doing the same, saying that everybody in the community should be as easily sharing their health data? Maybe, maybe not. One of the trade-offs which to my mind again is useful is when aggregate location data is used to determine traffic. That is data that we share as a community, as a society. But at an aggregate, we see the value of it. Now, what are the trade-offs that we are seeing that we continue making as a community? And what are the either pros or cons of it? Anshul, I would like to start with you. And I think specifically with your background, if you could touch a little bit upon like the smart metering process and how you're seeing that conversation evolve in the country and how you would like to see it proceed.
So, like, just to make a disclaimer, what I say is my personal opinion, because I've worked in IT department, state and central level, and was involved in this act. So, one thing I would just to give a context, I think, because many of people here are what you call Generation Z, I think, right, millennials. So, the old IT Act is 2002 vintage, that time, like, the things were in a very, we would say, proto stage and premature stage, and we have come a long way in those 20 years. So, the regulatory landscape is also evolving, like Data Protection Act has come, and DIA is in making. So the government in the system is very well aware of the kind of regulatory catching up which we have to do. Number one. Number two, like in the morning sessions also this was discussed that in other context, in context of manufacturing, in context of other regulations, that do we really not do we really, but there is a view that what is done in Scandinavian countries or somewhere in West at our stage of development journey, are those things appropriate to us? That is one view. And the other view is, because why digital regulation is different from other regulation, because this is an instant good. So the product, something which is created by Meta or YouTube or Netflix in US, it immediately comes here as well, and the consumption is also instantaneous. So having said that, how should be our regulation vis-a-vis other countries? That kind of trade-off, even that is also a trade-off that is there. Coming specifically to DPDP and the smart meter thing, so like smart meter, to have give an idea to those who don't have, that just like in mobile, what we have, prepaid and postpaid mobile, how much you consume, it gets metered, and you can choose to pay later or you can choose to pay before. So it's a very important part of power reforms in our country, which is going on currently. And the first stage of power reforms were in 2002 era, when generation, distribution and transmission were separated. Almost all the states have done that now. And it is really shown, all three functions are operating independently, and how efficient generation, transmission and distribution is out in the open. Aggregate TNC loss have also reduced, TNCD losses have also reduced, and central government has given very generous funding to state governments to bring back their state electricity boards or the distribution companies to the good financial health. Next part of it is installing smart meters. So I'm not going into the debate of where subsidies should be given or not, or free power should be given or not, but measurement is very important. So it's like just like मेरे घर में अगर बिजली का बिल आएगा, so I would be very careful that the light should not be on, and if it's a free, so like light चल रहा है, पंखा चल रहा है, nobody will bother. So in that sense of nudge, that sense of skin in the game, that sense of user behavior is important. Similarly, we all saw first lecture yesterday of Shamika ji about evidence-based policy making. So having this data is very important about the consumption pattern, दिन में ज़्यादा है, रात में ज़्यादा है, which temporal distribution, spatial distribution, festivals पे है, New Year पे है. So those kind of things are very important. Not only, we should not always look at like government is a big brother which is trying to intrude into life. System has to plan power production. Solar plants can't work in night. There are plants which take 2 days to start. There are plants which can work instantaneously. So just like in a manufacturing industry or in a service industry, you have to do demand planning, and you use all those operational research. Similar kind of demand forecasting and planning has to be done in the power industry also. And especially like all of us know, if anybody asks you about what is the next 10 trends of next year, next decade, climate change. And power is one of the biggest sectors, which is feeding into that carbon emissions. So it is very important that our power sector operates efficiently. And when we go on world stage and we are always, hauled on coals about our emissions, so our system should operate efficiently. Now, specifically coming to the point of smart meters and data sharing, so I think the new act talks about aggregate and anonymized data. So once the data is anonymized and it's aggregate, where the user information is not there, then its usage is allowed, and especially it permits for public usage and specified use cases. Having said that, the concerns about data privacy are very valid, because first you connect the data, and how do you anonymize it? Secondly, data will travel on some media, so data security on that particular media, cyber attacks happen, so cyber security has to be there. And how much do you retain data, and when do you discard it, data retention policies, those things are important. So I think once the rules are out, then sector specific regulations would be there. But I think in smart meter, because it's more a consumer and a provider relationship, and data principal, data fiduciary, data consent manager, all these things have been specifically defined, and even significant data fiduciary has also been defined. So I think maybe electricity boards would be significant data fiduciary, and a user will specifically consent, to what his data of electricity consumption or pattern consumption or usage can be used or not. Based on that, we should be able to evolve data. And I would say, like, we have very good examples like UPI, like the kind of transactions which is happening, and what data is being shared or not. Fastag is, I would say one such good Indian use case and example. So I think smart meter and power would be an area where maybe we would be able to show the world, how a responsible data sharing can be, done to deliver a public good in a more efficient manner, which at the same time delivers economy of scale as well.
No, thank you for that. And I think that's a very important aspect in evaluating the value of these trade-offs, because if we are in a position to not only have more intelligent policy making, but also better utilization of resources as a larger community, I think that is very valid to touch upon. And I think when we come to you, would love to get your thoughts, Ms. Nadkarni, on especially the aspects of checks and balances to be put in place while we are looking at the aggregation of data, especially when we're looking at it at a large scale. What to your mind are, again, like, we see the benefits of it, and we could touch upon that as also talking about the checks and balances to be put in place while we are collecting or availing of these larger societal basis data sets.
Yeah, so I mean, the power of data is, okay. The power of data is tremendous. There's no debate about that. For example, taking the same example that Anshul did about meters and smart meters and the impact it has on better service delivery. The challenge comes when the same data is used for purposes not meant for that service delivery, right? The challenge comes when, let's say tomorrow, hypothetically, the electricity department then decides to share that data with maybe another department of the government, or puts it out for public consumption, or shares it with other entities without my consent and without giving me a choice, right? I may, for example, I may be okay because if somebody else gets it and gives me some kind of an offer or a discount, I'm okay with it. But, Venki may say, hey, I don't want my data going on. Today, A, we have no choice. B, we don't have any control over who else gets access to what data. There's no transparency, which is what the DPDPA is sorting out, right? And giving us the regulatory guardrails to put those controls in place.
No, completely aligned. And I think actually to that point, Venki, if you could talk to us a little bit about exactly that point of the negotiation that we're talking about. Because what it now comes down to is us having to negotiate as a group. I would argue that even on this panel, we all may not have the same perspectives on a certain negotiation that comes before us. Yeah. Given that, if you could touch upon what the state of trade-offs are today, and then where do we want to see the future of these negotiations in a modular manner, in a trackable, auditable manner, and where we see that agency growing?
So I think that's a question that I can take an hour to answer. But very quickly, the thing is that today, if I want to share my data, the state of the art today is that the private sector is the rule maker, and we as individuals, and even to some extent the governments, these are the rule takers. If you look at how countries are trying to regulate the Amazons, the Googles, the Facebooks of the world, they're struggling to really rein in these organizations. They're struggling to regulate these organizations. So today, the game and the playing field is set by the private sector. Everybody else is just a follower. In the next few years, what might happen is that the government and governments around the world are looking at building digital public infrastructure. So in India, we have been kind of the pioneers of that. The digital public infrastructure of India has been one of the 4 talking points of the G20 presidency of India. So I think this will kind of bring the governments into the digital infrastructure game, which they had abdicated for the last 20 years. Now that will also bring in a new set of challenges. The ideal situation is where the government becomes a countervailing force to the private sector and negotiates on our behalf, protects our interests. If there are privacy violations, there are penalties for that. But the worst case scenario is that the government becomes another oppressor when, now you have a private sector which is kind of, where you have no negotiating power. If the government sector also becomes an entity with which you have no negotiating power, then the term called data principle that is there in the Digital Personal Data Protection Act is meaningless. If you have no agency, if you have no control over who sees your data, if you have no meaningful way to exercise control over your data, whether it's with the private sector or the public sector, then you are a data subject, not a data principle. And different countries have handled it differently. For example, in Singapore, if a government authority wants to see your data, they have to send you a request, and you have the power to reject that request. In India, at this point in time, I don't know what government agencies are looking at my data. My passport was stuck for a few days. I don't know why that happened, etc., etc. So I think the quick answer is, bottom line is, whether it's the government or the private sector, if I have meaningful control over my data, if you have meaningful control over your data, then you are a data principal. Otherwise, we are all data subjects.
No, unfortunately, there isn't a happy spin to that. I think that is the state of the nation where we are. So Mandar, if you could jump in and share your thoughts on where are we as a community and what has worked for us in terms of the trade-off that we have made, whether it is individual versus government, individual in the context of private entities, what has worked for us, but also what hasn't?
Okay, so I'll go with the positive first, because I think Venki painted a pretty bleak picture. So let me share the positive side. Now all of us have or will, given that this audience is young, interact with the lending ecosystem at some point in time. You'd probably buy some sort of a Bajaj Finance product at some point in time later on. Right now, you might want to buy a mobile phone and the like, right? So how, if you go back in the 80s and the 90s, it wasn't for everyone, okay? It wasn't so easy, and Bajaj Finance wasn't chasing our phones and sort of calling us incessantly. Credit was a very, very selective product. It was available only to a very select few of us. And the consequent prosperity that credit enables, and there are certain financial, there's a lot of financial research on how it enables and the like, so I encourage you all to go check it, would not have been possible until we had the credit information ecosystem through the several bureaus that are in place. Currently, we have 4 bureaus in place. They are regulated by the RBI under a broad-bus legislation called the Credit Information Act 2005. So they came around in late 90s. They matured around early in the aughts, in the first decade of this year. And then you had the RBI regulate it and the like. So, and that is why us, the children of the 1992 batch, so to speak, the class of 1992, post class of 1992, we benefit from it, right? So that's the positive. Now that is that sort of processing and the like. By the way, your credit performance and behavior and everything is tracked, right? And that is feeded through your banking institution and the NBFC to the credit bureaus, who will basically maintain a credit score, which you can access it, by the way, free for one time a year. It's accessible free for you. Otherwise, there are banks, fintech apps in place. They can check your credit score and the like. Now, how is that enabled? That credit data is not basically permissioned, right? That's basically under a mandate, but it benefits you because it makes you a member of the formal financial community, right? On the flip side, it also benefits lenders, because what it tells them is who is a good credit, what is a good credit and what is a bad credit, right? So how does that percolate again? So that basically flows through into pricing of the loans. So the reason that currently you're getting loans on BNPL and all this sort of innovation exists is because credit is sort of efficiently priced. Absent efficient credit pricing, you may not get it. Now, no one has sanctioned, it's basically processed not out of our explicit sanction, but because of the regulatory mandate. But that is something that has worked for us favorably. It is still a work in progress on the MSME side for all of us in this room that are small businesses. I am one. So it's still a work in progress on the MSME side, and we're sort of working on it, as we go. And we've also contributed to that discourse. You can check on the internet. That is on the positive side. On the negative side, you might not know, or perhaps you might know that there are the banks screen your transactions and the like, and they have to maintain a record of suspicious transactions, which they have to send to certain law enforcement agencies and the RBI. That is under the the PMLA, that is the anti-money laundering legislation. Now that tracking is fairly invasive, and that is not, again, born out of consent. You can't opt out of it by virtue of you being member of a formal financial community. What does that mean? That means that if you have a bank account, you're in it, you're tracked, you're basically under a scanner without you knowing it. Now that can get pretty invasive, and there are ways of moderating it, which I think we've not yet sort of out of the concerns. Optical, otherwise, I mean, basically, things like terrorist and bombing, and we went through an episode in the late aughts in Bombay, in Bombay, where we had this situation. So, flowing out of those concerns, we've not developed it, and we've let that sort of that framework continue, and banks are operating under that framework. But that is basically an illustration of where we could do things better. I won't say that that doesn't have its uses, because at some level, an upstream element of convenience is safety. Unless you're safe, you're not going to be able to express yourself. So arguably there is a reason to that, but I think with the passage of time, there are ways of moderating the kind of expansive, invasive regime that was put in place by the PMLA Act in the, whenever it was enacted. And the privacy discourse has to be read into it and sort of moderated, and hopefully the DPDP will be read in a way, the DPDP being the privacy law that is enacted recently, and the rules we are still awaiting. Hopefully, that will sort of moderate that impact. So yeah, plus and minus.
Yeah, no, completely, and thank you for that. And I think that's definitely the water's edge that we're all having to wrap our head around, right? I mean, and I think one place where, let's say, the Act contemplated exceptions to government in the form of security and sovereignty of the nation, the water's edge to that is, of course, when Apple is required to disclose information of its users for the same reasons. Now, where does that land? Now, does Apple get to have a unilateral view, or does Apple now turn vigilante and say that I am going to protect the citizens of this country, and I will then have access to the data for XYZ reasons? And those are some of the conversations where it's not a binary, but that's where we have to start moving from laws to frameworks. Because the laws are always going to be restricted by either just the compulsions of language, by restriction of grammar, and what we can take into court to easily process. But once we start moving to frameworks, we have vocabulary that can start adopting different situations. Let's take a pause to this and shift tracks for a bit. It is incumbent on us, once we start discussing privacy, to start discussing other emerging technologies as well. I think we've spent a little bit of time in the gloom and doom world, so let's try to uplift our views a little bit. Now, we see the concerns of AI. We're talking about, and if nothing else, AI superpowers everything. If things are going bad, AI can make it very, very bad, and so on and so forth. But with this environment, what are the problems that you think AI is best set out to solve? That this is a problem that I want the best AI minds to throw their views against, to solve for us. And in addition, if you could share views on specifically what that means for India. What are the benefits and advantages that India, with our population, with our job skilling efforts, are we uniquely stand to benefit from the progressions in AI?
So, the idea of AI has always been there, but there were technological constraints, and once we had GPU, once we had ability to process LLM, once we had cloud computing, it has really come forward in last, say, 2 to 3 years. And it's very difficult to predict the trajectory, but coming from a point of view of a public policy practitioner, executioner, I would say it has huge positive implications for India and the problems which we face. Like some of you might have noticed, how Prime Minister's speech at Kashi Tamil Sangamam, it was real time translated to Hindi to Tamil. That's a very use case. Very big use case is in health. We have been talking about telemedicines, the poor doctor to populace ratios, and how do we set up. The telemedicine has been tried in bits and pieces, direct basis, but to do the correct diagnosis, given the reports and given the tests and given the symptoms, I think here the big AI models can help us a lot. Similarly in education, so the most of the contents which edtechs have made till now, it's in English, but 80 to 90% of our children are in vernacular, and children who need skilling and proper education are in vernacular, and they are in state boards. So something which would have taken us many years to translate the material from one language to other, I think AI can achieve that thing for us in a very short span. And similarly, just like our huge size and our huge numbers has advantage, at times it has disadvantage in public service provision. So a system has to stifle through a lot of data, either manually or via system. So if we have the AI tools, be it in legal profession, be it grievance disposal, so I think there are tremendous use cases. And once, as somebody mentioned, there would be private solutions, and we will be very happy to, in a public system, adopt them and customize them to our needs.
I'll build on what Anshul said, and I'm glad you brought up the Indian language translation bit, because just about 10% of India speaks English. And, if you go to China, the operating systems, the applications, the software, everything is in Chinese. But in India, none of it is in, Hindi, Marathi, Gujarati, etc. So the digital divide is very, very stark. Even if, I think because of voice, etc., people are able to, do WhatsApp messages, voice messages. I speak to somebody in Coimbatore, and that person sends me a voice message because he can't type in English. So I think that's the use case of multilingual translation is a very, very useful one. It can help bridge the digital divide. The other personal example, I use a continuous glucose monitor paired to an app, and that app is really smart because it keeps telling me, your sugar just peaked because you just had a lot of carbs, because I keep feeding what I am eating into that. So it's very useful in terms of helping me understand what I should avoid, what I should eat more of, etc. So the AI has been implemented beautifully by that app. We are the diabetes capital of the world. So can we use AI to find medicines for diabetes, find medicines for the problems that tuberculosis, etc., which are not rich people or rich country problems, but poor country problems. I think there are education, of course, is a massive use case. I would say that digitization of education is something that we have to find ways to do that. I think in the next 10 to 15 years, I don't see us going back to being an analog society. I just see us becoming more and more of a digital society. So AI for looking at some of the large governance issues.
Yeah, so I think, is that the alarm buzzer?
I don't know. This feels like
Yeah.
the Oscars right now.
Yeah, okay. So now I'll just be quick. So I think Bhashini, since both the speakers have alluded to Bhashini, I think that is one of those really exciting projects that I am also looking out for. There's a lot of literature, technical and cultural in Marathi. We are in the land of Pula Deshpande. So that ought to be opened up to the rest of the nation and to the world, hopefully. And eventually, I think we'll get there with the help of these technologies. The specific call out on AI for me is agricultural credit. Right now, India's per capita land holding is the lowest. What happens is that because the land holding per capita is the lowest, it's not basically viable for any lender to lend to the small farmer. Okay, so then resultantly there is a whole political economy around farming and the pricing of those goods and the like. Now, where does AI come in? AI comes in from the credit underwriting perspective, the reason why we cannot credit assess farmers properly is because there is weather is unpredictable and weather derivatives are not yet developed. AI models, if sufficiently, if you sort of feed into that data, can be informative to create a credit derivative market that then the regulated entities like banks can, feed into their underwriting models, and then basically enable the downstream, credit opportunity for farmers. And trustfully, as a tertiary effect of that, could cure some of the political economy problems that farmers face. Also note that, since farmers form one end of the food chain, and all of us consumers form the other end of the food chain, and both are equally vulnerable in some sense. So these are, thorny problems to solve. And I kind of think that with weather derivatives, we may have a shot at it. Okay. I then sort of just one thing I wanted to close this point with is that MIT Tech Review of 2000. I think they ran a piece in October something, speaking about weather derivatives and how it can help underwriting and farmers credit and so on. So I encourage you all to look at that.
I think they've discussed a whole bunch of use cases. I just want to kind of sum it up saying that what is exciting about AI is that finally, after given the vast amounts of data that is available about India, finally all those algorithms can be utilized to actually have patterns and throw up results which are very pertinent to us as a continent, and not have them with the bias of maybe other ethnicities, other data points from other geographies. And therefore, I think adaptability to the Indian situation, the power of that is what is tremendous.
100%, and thank you so much for that. Actually, personally, I have there's one naive approach I have for the way AI can work for India. I think it can benefit the job skilling market. I think we often see that as antithetical. We see that as taking away jobs. But I do hope that where India has become the outsourcing capital of the world, if we can start outsourcing some of the more menial tasks, whether it is data labeling to a certain extent and so on and so forth, and can we go higher up the value chain in terms of better data and better jobs, better skills and better negotiations. I think that's what I'm looking forward to. Before the music starts off again, I will take a minute to thank the audience. Do we have time for questions? Okay. No, we do not have time for questions, unfortunately. And in fact, I will leave you with a question from me to you. And I was actually looking forward to discussing it with the panel, but we didn't have the opportunity. My request to this room full of extremely bright people is this. In your view, in an utopian world of privacy-preserving technology, what is a data-driven exploration that you would like to see out in the world? And then how can we start solving for it? For example, I personally am very excited and have recently been working with an entity on creating health models for India, very much like you had mentioned, to understand how health models of the world work uniquely for Indians and what are our blind spots and how it impacts us. Some of that depends on having a perfection of privacy-preserving either policies or technologies. So I would urge all of you to go back to the whiteboard and see how you can change the world and what you would like to see out in the world. Thank you so much for your time, everyone. Thank you. This is a fantastic presentation. Thank you.